that would open their doors to people who couldn't be accommodated by the shelters if there was a cold snap. She did the circle, kind of, that homeless people do. And she had some quirks, you know. One thing is, she was known for being really picky about her socks. She had 3 pairs of socks, and she wore a pair, and then she turned it inside out and wore it the next day, and then she carefully washed it and hung it out to dry wherever she was that night. She had next to nothing. She had a sleeping bag liner, she had long underwear, regular underwear, some toiletries, just one set of clothes. I mean, really nothing. Had nothing. Allie was there for about a month, and she made friends in that community, those homeless people that she resided with. And she was known for loving to explore puzzling life issues and have long conversations with people about them. And after about a month, Allie gathered together the people that she had become especially close to in that community there in Providence, and said, the truth is that I am Geraldine Wolfe, the Bishop of Rhode Island. She had taken a sabbatical and lived for a month on the streets with homeless people. And in reality, she had a little bit of trouble adjusting when she went back home, and she missed some of her new friends. You can read all about the experience in a book she wrote, Down and Out in Providence. And she said that homeless people were very different than what she had expected to find among them. Now, she was very careful, and she's very careful to say in her book that she did not live a homeless life. That she knew the whole 30 days that she was one phone call away from her apartment and her kitchen and her warm bed. She knew that the whole time that she wasn't truly homeless. Her reason for doing what she did was not to replicate the homeless experience. She says, I could never pretend to be homeless because I have a house with heat and electricity and a bedroom. So I'm not trying to duplicate their experience, but to enter into it the best way that I can. And the other thing is that at some level, we are all homeless. And I was tapping into my own homelessness. To touch those places is always to open the door, to be fed and nurtured. That presence with the homeless people is a facet of what I want to talk about today. But I'm going to make a short story long. Right? I was awed by that story the first time I ever read about it. And I have to say, Bishop Wolfe and I would not be in line with many things. And that was 2003. This is a significant number of years later. But it was an amazing thing to have done. Her actions were like those of the disciples in today's gospel. Go on your way. See, I am sending you like lambs into the midst of wolves. Carry no purse. People, I carry 2 purses. I have a little shopping purse I put on when I go in the store, and then I have the big purse that has everything I really need in it, and you can get washed up on a desert island with a big purse. Right? No bag, no sandals, greet no one on the road. Go on your way. I'm in awe of what she did there. So if we go on our way, as Christ says to, we must do it with simplicity. We have to do it with simplicity. The Quakers call it a lack of cumber. I love that term. Cumbersome. It's a lack of cumber. Practicing simplicity, in any way we manage to practice it, changes our lives, our hearts, our minds. This is literally true, of course. There's a whole industry of people who help us get rid of stuff we've acquired, right? And once we give something up, we no longer have to dust it, display it, use it, fix it, insure it, etc., etc. I mean, it frees us up. It frees up energy. And that energy is of the heart and of the brain when we give up objects, because every object we own has its own set of tasks that we have to perform with it. So if we simplify our possessions, we spend less time on maintaining those things. We gain room in our homes. We recover the energy and attention that we used to spend on those tasks. One of the effects of the schism that happened in the Episcopal Church in Fort Worth in 2008 and 9 was that we were all locked out of our buildings. And it wasn't gradual. One Sunday we went, and the next Sunday there was a sign on the door, "Do not attempt to enter here, but we'll call the police on you." And so we lost everything. All this, lost it. We used to kid that our sacristies became the trunks of our cars. And we met anywhere we could, school cafeteria, a building downtown, a room at the library, a field, somebody's house. And it was, I'm not at all glorifying that time because it was heart-wrenching, heartbreaking. And one of the things that's true for Episcopalians is that what we offer Christendom is our liturgies, and liturgies need buildings. And we were deeply wounded. But one thing that came out of that is no more stuff. Right? And all of a sudden, our energy redirected. We lost all that permanently, as it turned out. But that church and that Episcopal church in that area of the country is thriving. And part of it is the gifts they found in that sudden, other-enforced simplicity that they had to endure. But there's more. There's more to a life of simplicity than just not owning stuff. And Jesus talks about it in the gospel today. The disciples received instructions on simplicity of relationship as well. They were supposed to take what comes and be satisfied without striving for more. No, you don't have to go find the best olive oil. You don't have to look at the ratings on everything you buy. Covetousness is wanting more, a scarcity that fills a person's life. And Jesus is saying, don't. Stay with the first person you meet. If the first person they met was poor, they would share the life of a poor person while they were in that town. No moving from house to house, because he saw what was ahead. He saw that they would succeed, and therefore receive lots of attention, and therefore be invited into the mayor's house as soon as it was known who and what they were, and stay where you started. Stay with the people who first greet you. Be fully present in the moment and with the people that you first meet. Now, many of us have experience. I'm not looking at anybody in brown. Many of us have experience in living lives of simplicity and seeking out both spiritual and material simplicity. One type and another. But I want to offer you another idea and another avenue today for that simplicity of life that Jesus calls us to in order to live in his power. And I'm just going to go there with an example. One example. as I'm looking around, I don't know who's at home, but as I'm looking around, I'm seeing all white people. Right? Some of us live in multiracial families, but all of us are white. And when something happens to a black person, and an egregiously racist incident happens, our tendency as white people often, and as allies to people of color, is to step up, stand up, speak up, in the full belief that our voice is valid, that our voice can create change and should create change, that we should use our voice responsibly. We pick up our sons in March, we write letters, we fund things, and we make change happen because we're white. But that's not where we should be speaking. As allies to people of color, to LGBTQ people, to women, to the poor, whoever we're allying with, we should be their support. We should offer space for their healing so that they find their voice, so that they speak, so that their voice becomes centered in the discussion. A simplicity of life for us, and then white is just one example, is to be the power behind that developing voice, not the power that raises its voice. You never thought you'd hear me say that, did you? Nobody here probably ever thought they'd hear me say, it's not yours. The stories to be told by vulnerable groups in our society now are their stories. And we don't tell them, they do. And so what's on us, if we're followers of Christ, if we're seeking after a simplified way of living that shows the power of God, is for us to help them as they develop their voices. For us to redirect attention, for example, in this case, from white-centered dialogue into the dialogue to be held by people of color. For them to rise up as we sink down. That's a simplicity of life to which we're called as Christians, to give up a power that is ours virtually by right because of how we live in a society. And that could apply to any group that we want to talk about. Many of us are LGBTQ plus people. We need to be supported by our allies to speak our truth. Those of us who have multiracial families or friends need to support them in telling their truth, not articulate it for them. You see the nuance? And so on and so forth. Those of us who have money need to help the poor raise their voice. Those of us who are male or identify on that end of the gender spectrum need to help those of us who are on the female end as we raise our voice. All of us. All of us need allies. All of us can be allies. But that dynamic lies in a simplicity of spirituality that we need to claim as Christians. It's a nuance, but that's okay. We're good at nuance. What happens is that the voices that speak become not our voices. The stories of harm are not our stories. And so, as we practice that simplicity, we don't denounce and proclaim, but we stand with those who are vulnerable as they do. Simplicity causes us to be fully present with the people that Christ sets in our path as they become strong and active. Now, there are times and places where we should be writing and carrying signs and speaking out I never want to be heard to say, be silent. What I want to be heard to say is, don't expect to be the center. As we place Christ in the center of our life, other people will become the center of these conversations. We are not the creators in this situation. We're the supporters. And when we do this, we begin to see God fill the empty spaces, and every corner of life becomes full to bursting with God's saving action. God becomes the central core around which we live. And as activities and organizations and opportunities make claims on our lives, we act out of that center, not out of our own. Richard Foster talks about it being not God coming into us, but us going into God. And then evil is vanquished. If you have wondered in this chaotic society what's going to happen next, evil will be vanquished. That's where we rejoice. Remaining in the same house with those who are vulnerable, being allies, we lay it down and go forward because we trust in God. And as Richard Foster says, as we do that, there come welling up whispers of divine guidance and love that make life radiant. Amen.
Amen.